to be incredibly satirical in the most comedic way, while at the same time keeping a semblance of a real story that matters, all the while developing multiple characters of depth. And oh yeah, and they give the people what they want. That is the Eminence in Shadow. The comedic irony in the show is amazing. It's like when you say one of the most funniest things with a straight face. I guess you'd call that sarcasm. This whole show is very sarcastic in the best way possible. At face value, the Eminence in Shadow approaches its story with all the most cliche isekai tropes. An OP MC with a harem of ladies that love and respect him. It's a pretty standard copy and paste attributes of certain isekais we see these days. But this is what makes the Eminence in Shadow different. So guys, there are some spoilers in here from season 1. So if you guys still haven't watched season 1, I would recommend go watch it. Go ahead guys, catch up. And alright, let's jump right into it. So the show features Sid Kageno, formerly known as Minoru Kageno. So Minoru Kageno, he dies, he gets isekai into this new world where he actually becomes what he wishes to be. What he wishes to be is basically a vigilante kind of hero from the shadows in all the wild fantasies that we've had as we grew up as a kid, acting out our favorite superheroes. That's basically Sid Kageno. But now he actually has the powers. So from Sid Kageno's past as Minoru Kageno, he always wanted to be a hero from the shadows. But obviously in the real world, he doesn't have any real powers. But he still does what he can. He still dresses up like a vigilante and he goes and beats up bad guys. So taking that perspective of him wanting to be this vigilante in the shadows, when he gets isekai'd into this other world, he gets to become just that. So he's a character super obsessed with being the strongest and fighting bad guys from the shadows while he lets everyone else shine. So when Sid Kageno gets isekai'd into this other world, he develops this organization called Shadow Garden, which is a secret organization where they end up fighting against the cult of Diablos, this mysterious underground organization, basically trying to take over the world. And Sid Kageno fights these bad guys as Shadow. So what's great about this show is they create characters that actually matter. Even though Shadow or Sid Kageno is the MC of the show, the focus is really on everyone else around him. So in order for the show to kind of develop a lot of interesting characters with depth, Shadow has to be away from a lot of very important plot points in order to build up everyone else to have important roles in the show. For Shadow as a character, he's basically a complete character already, and he has a pretty simplistic character arc, but that's not really a bad thing. He only has a few goals that are not about gaining some kind of wisdom. He doesn't need to get smarter. He doesn't need to overcome anything in particular besides he just wants to be the strongest. He just wants to live this kind of fantasy where he gets to fight bad guys in the shadows and literally experience all the fun cliche anime tropes as Sid Kageno or Shadow. So he wants to be the side character, but he is the main character in the show. And at the same time, when he is being like a side character in the show, everyone else around him, they get to develop very important parts in the story. So once again, Sid Kageno, he's just experiencing every kid's dream of literally acting out the fantasy of being your favorite superhero. But he's more vigilante than anything else. This anime is more of a dark fantasy. Like, he's okay with just straight up killing bad guys. There's no, we can save everyone. Nah, Sid Kageno's like, bad guy equals dead guy. So Shadow, he already has all the wisdom in the world, likely developed when he was Minoru Kageno from the real world, where he didn't have any powers and where anime tropes and stuff like that existed in that world. So he brought a lot of that over into this isekai world. This is where I could kind of go on and on about the layers of this anime. The story gives an outlet for him to experience his fantasy of fighting bad guys, all the while unintentionally being legitimate learning lessons for everyone else. In the very first episode, you'd actually think Akane Nishino was going to be a very crucial character in the series, except she's only there for one episode. And her part plays a very important role, not only for her own character, But for Minoru Kageno, aka Sid Kageno, we learn about essentially putting on a fake face. That was the learning lesson in that episode, a facade to please people, not being your real self. The end of the episode, Akane realizes this because of Minoru Kageno. So that's how the episode uses conflict of another character, but using Sid Kageno, or in this case Minoru Kageno, as that example to teach us a learning lesson in the episode and for the character to kind of develop something. So in that episode, Akane Nishino was the star of that episode. It was really what Minoru Kageno does to kind of help propel her into learning and obtaining some kind of knowledge or some kind of insight within herself. That is kind of littered throughout this entire series. Examples of just that. By the end of the first episode, Shadow says it himself. He lurks in the darkness to fight the shadows so he can let everyone else shine. So the spin here is while Shadow is responsible for saving the world, everyone else gets the credit in some way, and some way gets to be crucially involved in the plot in a way that really matters. So ultimately, Shadow becomes the reason why the world is saved, but it takes all these other characters that play that role into getting to the point where Shadow ends up fighting some kind of bad guy. So another example is when Sid Kageno's sister, Claire Kageno, gets kidnapped, who we learn later on was kidnapped by a member of the cult of Diablos. Shadow Garden shows up to fight the bad guy and learn things about the cult of Diablos. And while Shadow Garden ends up fighting, Shadow gets lost. And Shadow getting lost is kind of like the oblivious thing that the show does a lot. There is a comedic element to that, but it doesn't really matter whether or not he knows or not knows. It's kind of funny, but it's another way to make Shadow stay away from the bad guy first so other characters can shine. That's the key part in these stories. You can't have Shadow duke it out with everyone at the very beginning. It makes sense to have other characters to take part in important moments in the story. Technically, Shadow, he can't be everywhere at every moment anyways, right? So other people have to take on that role. In this case, we get to see a little bit more of Alpha and a little bit more of the Shadow Garden. Think about One Punch Man, the shonen satire. These two animes to me are the top satirical comedic animes out there. They are a couple of the best examples of how to do these things well. So in that arc, when Shadow gets lost and the main bad guy basically escapes from Shadow Garden, that bad guy ends up running into Shadow. And what does Shadow do? When he fights the bad guy, he actually teaches the bad guy a lesson. So what did I say earlier about Shadow already having the wisdom and knowledge? And in that same episode, Claire herself even says that she actually learns a lot from her little brother, Sid Kageno. So what does Shadow teach us in that episode? He teaches us that it's not all about raw power. It's about how you use something. That's a general cliche trope, but it's a great start to the series to give us a certain expectation of how the series will go. And that's the first really big plot that introduces us to a lot of things that happen in the show. So another example of Shadow being somewhere else in the plot while the other main cast of characters, while they actually have a important role to the story. That example is when they go fight the fat dude, Nelson the Avaricious, one of the members of the cult of Diablos. After this big tournament that happens, Sid actually goes into this portal and spends time with Aurora, which is supposed to be this big bad witch of the past, one of the strongest characters ever in their universe. They both start to develop a relationship, not necessarily a romantic one, maybe more for Aurora than it was for Sid, but they start to develop some kind of bond and travel through this whole cult of Diablos thing that's going on. And then Shadow Garden, Rose, and Alexia, and then they tell us more about what's going on with the cult of Diablos and give us a little bit more context behind the main plot. So this eventually leads us to the classic last boss fight. So that's kind of what I mean when the series still capitalizes on typical anime tropes, keeping a story that matters intact while at the same time make fun of it. So in that same arc, we have another example of like when Delta fights Nelson. Delta doesn't use any type of skill. Delta is not a character that is not representative of having any kind of like real technique, some skills. She's a character that's literally supposed to be kind of like a beast. So Delta ends up beating Nelson's ass with just literal brute feral strength. She doesn't use any powers or anything like that. She just beats his ass down. That in itself, while it's funny, it's actually a learning lesson too. So like, no matter how much you train, how much you learn to do certain kind of martial arts, sometimes brute strength in sheer size will defeat you. So Delta is basically that. Another example was Sid Kagano undercover as Mundane Man versus Iris Midgar. This fight tied in so many different elements because it was about the hubris of Iris Midgar building up to that moment of being full of herself, that she could just overcome everything, that she is like the undisputed most powerful character in the show, that she has this Shadow Garden, the cult of Diablos. This whole situation, this main plot that's happening underneath everyone's noses, she feels like she has all this under her control and that she can handle it herself. But no. She gets humbled really fast. How Mundane Man was used is like one of the most hilarious things ever. That character is used in a way where they play off all the most funny tropes. You had Goldie with the power level scale, and then you had all of the fun like fighting tropes of the ability of Mundane Man that other characters, they can't see what he can do. So Mundane Man essentially trolls everyone in this big tournament that he fights. When he finally gets matched up with Iris, he teaches Iris this very important lesson and he just completely dismantles her. The story makes this even more clear about Iris's hubris, her faults, by also using her father, the King Midgar himself. He reiterates how Iris's thought process is a bit misguided. And then another example, which is from my favorite character in the show, is actually Alexia Midgar. After the arc with Claire Kagano getting kidnapped by the cult of Diablos, the next arc up was about the introduction of Alexia Midgar. And they develop a relationship together through unwanted means from Sid. He gets roped in with Alexia in this relationship. The character development for Alexia happened like really amazingly because it all happened in like one episode as well, and the whole entire character arc concluded with Shadow's I Am Atomic scene. So Alexia, her character starts off initially playing off this typical princess trope, all the things that we come to expect out of our princess, but Alexia is anything but that. She's crude, she used Sid to try to get back at Zen and Griffey. She sees through people's fakeness because to her, there isn't any perfect person. So she despises people like Zen and Griffey. And Zen and Griffey is the guy that's supposed to be matched up with Alexia because he's this perfect prince kind of character. And Alexia just can't stand a guy like that because it's so damn fake. So within that already, guys, in a character, that's a lot already to expect out of a character beyond the trope. First, she's presented as that princess trope, but she shows that she's anything but that. And it goes deeper into the character because she sees through people. And that's another great insight for a character like Alexia. Her growth as a character kind of reaches a conflict climax. And this is all because of Sid. And this all happened in this train scene. We learned that she hates her lack of talent. And she's always being compared to her super talented sister who won this Bushin Festival fighting tournament deal. So she's always being compared, like we all have siblings, right? We all have this comparison to each other. And everyone praises the one that is more beautiful, more handsome, more anything that's better than whatever you're less than. So this builds some kind of resentment. This builds this inferiority complex that she has with her sister. So right there, that's another level of depth to her character. We learn things about her personally, how she sees the world, how she sees people, And now we see this kind of character defect of that a lot of us that have siblings, we can all relate to that from Alexia. But this brings to what Sid actually sees in Alexia. Sid sees Alexia, she actually trains really, really hard. While she lacks talent that makes her into a super powerful character, while she doesn't have that, she's becoming this master of the basics of swordsmanship. So they call this Bonjin no Kin. So she's this fencer ordinaire, which, you know, it does sound pretty bad. Nobody wants to be called some kind of average person, right? But that is the reality of her situation when we're comparing like powers and her abilities in the show. But Sid sees this as a good thing because he himself, that's where Sid comes into play, where earlier in the previous arcs where he was teaching this Cult of Diablos guy about it's not about the power, it's about how we use it. But that's when it kind of comes back, where something that he was teaching someone else, he is now teaching Alexia about that not being a bad thing. That he himself is, you know, learning the basics and mastering the basics. That's where it starts. And he doesn't necessarily have all this kind of talent, but technically he does. But from his previous life as Minoru Kagano, he had to learn basics of just defending himself and getting stronger in just a more realistic way without all these powers. So a character like him makes a lot of sense to teach someone like Alexia this lesson. So she kind of breaks up with Sid Kagano and then she leaves, and that is when she gets kidnapped. There's a lot of kidnapping in this damn show. So later on, when Shadow fights the main bad guy, who ends up being Zenin Griffey, he hits him with the I am atomic scene. But before he hit him with that, Alexia actually ends up watching Shadow fight with his basic fighting style. She realizes that, you know, Sid was right and accepts that she should be proud of her fighting style in becoming the Bonjin no Kin. That is the deep learning lesson, guys, in that arc. You learn to accept one's strengths. You learn to accept what you're not. You learn that you can become something. You just won't become that special thing, but you can be special somewhere else and you can still play an important role. Which you could kind of see how that affects the show, because what does Sid do? He lets everyone else shine. And there's other like important typical cliches, working hard and doing all the little things. So I just love her entire character arc. I love that 2-episode stretch because we learned so much and there was so much depth, and it brings back a lot of my premise of Shadow or Sid Kagano teaching other characters what they lack and what they don't understand. So usually those kind of characters, it comes from a Master Roshi. It comes from these other characters, but right now it comes from Shadow. It comes from Sid Kagano. And where does he learn it from? He learned it from the real world, from other animes and mangas like that, and that's what makes it funny too. So that's why I tell you guys, there's layers and layers of just fun when you just think about the perspectives that you can pull from the show and pull from the story, pull from these characters, pull from the arc. Like, that's why I freaking love this anime, man. It makes you think, and it makes you think in very fun, interesting ways where there's actual levels of depth of something to learn from. It's you're learning these tropes and these things, but you're learning it in a different way that I haven't really seen it before. So yeah, guys, that's why I like Alexia's character arc. This is where her personality shines for like the rest of this series. She's spunky, abrasive, abusive towards Sid, and you know, she develops this romantic urge for Sid, and that plays into the typical trope of the princess, the very attractive girl, falling in love with the main character, the protagonist. But no. Sid is not a simp, and he happily denies her multiple times. And this becomes a running joke for a while. That's hilarious, guys. All the typical heroes, they take the princess poon, but not Sid. He's not a simp. He just wants to be nuclear, guys. And I love that. So I guess a character like Dark Schneider is kind of the opposite. So if you guys want to see a real harem, then I guess it would be Bastard is for you. So guys, I can literally make a video about the Eminence and Shadow and talk about every little parts of this show. I can make a video for that every single week. And the new season is coming out right now in less than a month, in the beginning of October. There's just so much great perspective and storytelling and characters used in unique ways that it still teaches you basically the same thing, but it's done in a very unique way that makes it the perspective and thinking about it very, very fun and different. So right now though, I've only watched the anime, but I've read the manga up to the point of season 1. I really don't want to go deeper into the manga. I know the Japanese mangas, they're quite a bit further, and the light novel is way ahead. I'm going to try to avoid that for now. Maybe I'll come and revisit the light novel when season 2 is actually over. But right now, man, I'm enjoying the anime, just the anime. I still want to be surprised at what happens, and I love their take versus the manga's take. The manga does things a little bit differently. It's a little bit more humorous, but the anime, it gives off this vibe of something serious, and at the same time you have this sarcasm that comes through, this comedic irony. It's like when someone says something funny in a very serious face. That's the best kind of analogy I have for the show, because that's just the vibe that I get from it. But yeah, guys, let me know what you guys think about the Eminence of Shadow season 1. And you know, this is my general thoughts, and I'm super excited for season 2. So don't spoil me in the comments, but just let me know if you guys are super excited about season 2 as well. So yeah, do me a favor, guys, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. Check out my blog at otakusin.com. I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you guys on the next video.